Rainbow Six Siege is a decade old, and when you have a game as old as Siege, there are bound to be a lot of changes in the game. So in today's video, I'll be breaking down the 21 best changes in Rainbow Six Siege history. One of the best changes in Siege history is the Chalet rework. If you don't know, Chalet used to be one of the worst maps in the game, if not the worst map in the ranked pool. There were so many windows everywhere, there were staircases everywhere as well, that it made attacking very, very easy. Not to mention, there was a balcony that led directly from attacker's spawn onto the master bomb site, making it to where even Master, which is the most popular bomb site on the map, completely unplayable. With the Chalet rework, they took a lot of windows out of the map, making it to where attackers didn't have as many angles. They removed the second floor west main staircase, they removed the balcony from Master and replaced it with the solar room, and made the map overall much more playable. Chalet overnight went from one of the worst maps in the ranks to one of the best. Now that was just one out of 21 different changes that I'll be going over in today's video. Some of these changes were so influential that you might not have even known that they happened, so make sure that you stick to the end. Because the second best change in Rainbow Six Siege history, a lot of people forgot about, and that was the reinforcement pool. If you don't know, back in the day, every operator on defense when you spawned in was given 2 reinforcements you could put down, instead of what we have now, where there is a pool of reinforcements that everybody can share from, meaning that you can have one operator, like Vigil for example, that has no sight setup to do whatsoever, that can reinforce 5 or 6 walls for sight, whereas a Jaeger with 3 ADSs and a bulletproof camera doesn't have to worry about reinforcing anything and can just put down all of the utility they need to put down. It's a much more balanced system that requires a lot less skill from your teammates and is overall one of the best changes in Siege history because of how easy it is to be a defender now. Another great change in Rainbow Six Siege history that completely reworks how everybody interacts in the game is the addition of crossplay. And no, I'm not talking about the addition of crossplay from Xbox to PlayStation, I'm talking about the addition of crossplay from console to PC. Crossplay is one of the most influential changes in Siege history, and it's definitely one of the best as well. I mean, think about it purely from a content perspective. You wouldn't have the ability to have people like jynxzi to be able to crossplay and play ranked with people like Spoit. Imagine all of the content opportunities that we have now that just simply wouldn't be here if crossplay was never added. You have the ability to play in custom games with people who are on PC when you're on console, and vice versa. Crossplay in general has made content a lot better, but it also makes people who have friends that aren't on your system able to play with you. If you're on PC but 4 of your friends are on PlayStation, you can still play with them, and they can still play with you. The only issue about this change is that people on PC can't turn it off, which usually ends up with you having a stack of 4 roller players that are absolutely terrible, and you're going against Spoit in his prime with 4 other Pro League players. It's never really fair, especially for PC players, but it does make the community connected as a whole a lot more, and overall is one of the most positive changes in Siege's history. Moving back to strictly gameplay changes though, I want to talk about the introduction of a secondary gadget, specifically the secondary EMPs. The addition of secondary EMPs was absolutely crucial to the game balance as we know it today. Before secondary EMPs, you had to have a Maverick or a Thatcher on your team in order to get open any single wall. This essentially made it to where you only had the flexibility of being able to play 4 operators as one of you had to play Thatcher, as opposed to what we have now where anybody can play any operator as long as one of you is bringing secondary EMP grenades. Usually that's not an issue because secondary EMP grenades are brought on operators that are very good. Operators like Grim, Dokkaebi, and Gridlock, just to name a few. Secondary EMPs just allowed more versatility on attacks. It made people ban Thatcher less and overall balanced the attacker lineup a lot more. But just like people had to run Thatcher back in the day, they also had to run Thermite or Ace back in the day as well, which is why the next change that was so important in Rainbow Six Siege history was the addition of another secondary gadget, which was hard breaching charges. Like I said, back in the day, you had to bring either a Thermite, Hibana, or more recently, an Ace. When hard breaching charges were added in Operation Shadow Legacy though, everything changed. Hard breaching charges, just like EMP grenades, made it to where you could have a more flexible attacking lineup. You had operators that could bring hard breaching charges and get open a wall completely by themselves if there were no EMPs on the board and still have another ability left over. Taking Buck for an example, when he had hard breaching charges, you could get vert with an operator and get the hatches open all in one single person, which made solo queuing a lot easier and overall gameplay a lot more versatile. It made people ban hard breachers less and play them less as well, which overall made the game more more balanced. Someone that was not at all balanced though is the operator I'll be talking about in one of the next best changes in Siege history, which is the nerf to Lion. If you do not know, years ago in Operation Chimera when Finga and Lion came out, Lion was the most broken attacker ever, and even to this day stands as the most broken attacker on release. You may look at Lion as an operator now and think, how could that be possible? He's such a balanced operator. Well, back then, he worked a lot differently than he does now. When you would Lion scan, instead of just pinging you once every 1 second for 3 seconds, if you moved even an inch, it would continuously outline your body in red, essentially giving the enemy team wall hacks onto you for a short amount of time. You also have to keep in mind that back then, people weren't used to Lion scans, so a lot more people were falling for the Lion scan, making it to where a lot of people just got free wall hacks on the attack. If you pair this up with the frag grenades that Lion had, as well as a 50-round drum mag on a gun with no recoil, Lion was the best attacker hands down. And when Dokkaebi came out next season, as well as Bolo inspiring people to lean a bunch on Ashe, Lion was just the catalyst that started the rush meta. So because Lion was so strong, after 6 months of him being completely broken, Ubisoft finally nerfed him to the ground, making him borderline unplayable. And even though he was one of the weakest attackers in the game at the time, nerfing him was definitely the right decision, and it balanced out the game again to what it was before Lion was released. Since then, Lion has been buffed considerably and made one of the more balanced operators in the game, but on release, that was not at all the case. Something else that was broken on release until its eventual removal was the 1.5 and 2x scopes, which is why one of the best change in Siege's history is the removal of these scopes. If you don't know, in Operation Shadow Legacy, the 1.5 and 2x scopes were added into the game. This added a lot more versatility for a lot of operators, but a huge issue was that the 1.5 and 2x scopes were just good. Specifically though, the 1.5 times scope. This scope wasn't too zoomed in to where you couldn't take close range gunfights, and it wasn't too zoomed out to where you couldn't take long range ones. The crosshair wasn't invasive, so you could still see pretty clearly in the scope, unlike something like the Holo D, and the amount of glass space you got compared to the amount of space that the shell took up on your screen made it to where you could see all of your peripherals and still see everything inside of your scope that was zoomed in. It was by far the best scope in the game, and there was not one situation in the game where the 1.5 couldn't get the job done. This scope was so good, in fact, that entire operators would be played or balanced based off of if they had the 1.5 times scope on their gun or not. If you take Warden, for example, on release, Warden was not played at all. In fact, he was seen as one of the worst operators in the game, but when he was given a 1.5 times scope, his pick rate shot over 90%, which was actually more than Jaeger at the time, who had previously been the most played defender in the game for years. So simply giving a 1.5 times scope to an operator made them the most played operator overnight and made them absolutely broken for taking gunfights, which is why the removal of the 1.5 times scope in Year 9 Season 1 Deadly Omen was one of the best changes in Siege history. It finally rebalanced guns and made it to where operators weren't balanced based off of the scopes on their guns. Overall, this change was great, but came from a terrible change at the start of Shadow Legacy. Another change that was actually pretty good in Operation Shadow Legacy was the rework or nerf to Thatcher. Thatcher right now is a pretty balanced operator, and you'll really only bring him situationally if you know you have multiple walls you need to get open if they're bandit tricking or cade tricking. And honestly, that's how Thatcher should have been from release, but that's not how Thatcher was when the game came out. You see, instead of Thatcher disabling gadgets and then allowing them to be redeployed after a short amount of time, when Thatcher's EMP would explode, it would completely destroy gadgets instead of disabling them. Imagine having an entire defensive setup that's very thought out, very strategy heavy, and then Thatcher throws in one EMP grenade into the bomb site, and all 5 of your operators have all of their gadgets completely disabled and destroyed for the entire round. One EMP grenade would completely counter an entire defense setup. It took absolutely no skill, and he was very easy to play, so much so that Thatcher was brought every single round. When operator bans came out shortly thereafter, Thatcher was the most banned attacker because of this. And even today, after Thatcher's been nerfed for many years, he still stands as the most banned attacker in the entire game, purely because of his history and how much he was banned in the past. Overall, Thatcher's nerf was needed and stands as one of the best reworks in the game, just like this next rework for a secondary gadget, which is the deployable shield rework. The rework for deployable shields were pretty interesting. It took deployable shields from being one of the worst gadgets in the game to one of the best gadgets in the game. But how did this happen? Well, in Operation Ember Rise, when deployable shields would be reworked, it would take deployable shields from being completely opaque on one side to the other to adding in these little glass slits in the middle of the shield. These pieces of glass allowed you to actually see what was on the other side of the shield, which made it to where you could peek people once you had the information when you were behind the shield. The issue with shields before is you couldn't see through them, meaning that if you were to peek your shield and try to go for a kill, you were taking a 50-50 chance on whether somebody was already staring at your shield waiting for you to peek. But with this information on the shield, shield, now you had the advantage, and peeking a deployable shield was a death trap. This quickly turned deployable shields into, like I said earlier, the best secondary gadget overnight, and after more secondary gadgets and counters to deployable shields were introduced seasons later, it stands as one of the most balanced secondary gadgets in the game. Something that was not at all balanced, though, that had to be completely removed from Rainbow Six Siege is bullet holes. And I think the removal of bullet holes is one of the best changes in Siege history because of how broken they were. If you don't know, when you would go up to drywall or a wooden wall or just a soft wall in the game in general, all you had to do to put a hole that you could see through in the wall was shoot one bullet. And from anybody else's perspective that tried looking at the wall, they couldn't really see the bullet hole because it was a bullet hole. It was tiny, but it allowed you to see them, making it to where you could spawn peek, get crazy angles, and overall just get free wins due to you shooting one single bullet into a wall. It was by far completely broken, and when bullet holes were finally removed, defending was a lot less powerful and one-sided, and the game was a lot better off for it, which is why I think the removal of bullet holes stands as one of the best changes in Siege history. Another good change in Siege history that wasn't really that game-breaking, but was more of just a quality of life change, was this next change, making attachments completely universal across all operators. If you don't know, back then, scopes only came on certain operators. You had the Russian scopes on Russian operators, the American scopes on American operators, and the European scopes on European operators. You had the occasional outlier, like the red dot, like the holographic B that came out on Mozzie, and now the Tachanka holo that comes on his LMG. But in the game, back then, attachments were segregated based off of where the defender came from, or where the attacker came from. With Operation Shadow Legacy, every attachment could be run on every single gun, aside from anything above a 1x scope. You also had shared ACOGs, meaning that the ACOG B and the ACOG A, otherwise known as the Russian ACOG and the American ACOG, would be shared on any operator, no matter if you were Russian or American, just adding more versatility to more guns, because honestly, some of the scopes really sucked and made it to where you just couldn't run them, and you didn't have many other options other to run them. So the game was a lot better off when you could add more scopes to more guns. Something else that made the game a lot better off is actually a pretty recent change that I think most people forgot that they added because they're just so used to it now. And that was one of the best changes in Siege history, which is attacker repick. If you don't know, back in the day, when you selected an attacker before the prep phase, that was the attacker that was selected. You couldn't change your attackers after seeing the defensive setup. As of right now, if there's a Goyo on the board and a Malusi on the board, and I'm droning and I see that, I can just change my operator to Twitch or Brava and counter one of those operators. But back then, if you didn't pick it before the prep phase and you saw the operators, you couldn't repick your operator. You were just screwed. And I think, unfortunately, this made the game a lot more defender-sided back then than it currently is now. People right now complain about the game being defender-sided, but you just weren't there when you couldn't repick attackers, except for 6th pick and Pro League. So having the ability to repick your entire attacking lineup to counter all of the defense actually made the game a little more attacker-sided than defender-sided for a little bit. I do think the game right now is more balanced than it ever has been in the past few years. There isn't really a hard meta other than like maybe shields, but even then they get banned most of every ranked game. And attacker repick heavily swayed that in the right direction. Moving on from meta defining changes, let's go over a quality of life change that I think stands to be one of the better quality of life changes in Siege's history. And that is the change of going from 3 map bans per game to 5 map bans per game. In Shadow Legacy, I know, another Shadow Legacy change, they introduced map bans for the first time, where you could ban 2 out of 3 different maps and essentially guarantee that you play one map if you communicated to the enemy team. The issue with this map system when they introduced it was that anytime you would ban a map, if the other 2 maps were unbanned because both of the teams banned the same map, the map on the left would always be the map that would be picked. So you essentially always knew which map you were going to play, allowing you to just force maps if you wanted to play them. This is unbalanced, and it made maps that were banned or unbanned not random, which was the entire point of map bans in the first place. So instead of fixing the game-breaking bug that allowed this to happen, they just added 2 more maps to the map ban pool and finally randomized it. That way, even if you ban 2 out of the 3 maps, there's still 2 extra maps you have to worry about that could be bad maps that you're forced to play. This makes it to where even if there are bad maps, you're still going to have to learn and play them eventually, which is just overall better for the game's health. Something that was a lot more influential for the game's health, though, was the nerf to Azami. Azami on release was the best defender in the game, hands down, and even to this day you can make an argument for her being the best defender in the game, but she's not completely broken. On release, though, she was completely broken, and that's for 2 reasons. For one, her gadget was bulletproof, meaning you couldn't just mag dump your entire magazine from your primary weapon into the gadget and it destroy. It was bulletproof, so you had to use grenades, Flores, Zofia, Ash, whatever it may be, to destroy the gadget. And if you think about her having 5 Kibas, that's 5 deployable shields that the defense has pretty much. The second reason Azami was completely broken on release is because you could use her barricades grenades to get into parkour spots that you'd never be able to access without her, essentially making it to where attackers could not find you, but you could easily kill them. For these two reasons, Azami was S tier, completely broken, the best defender in the game, until finally she got nerfed, which is why I think that stands to be one of the most influential updates in Siege history, and definitely one of the most necessary ones as well. Another defender that needed to get nerfed though was Ela. Ela on release was one of the best defenders in the game. I won't say she was as strong as Azami was on release, but she's definitely up there. Back in the day, her Scorpion Evo had absolutely zero recoil, and instead of having 30 bullets like it does now, it had 50. And instead of having 3 mines like she does now, she had 4, and a 5th one that you could deploy when you got downed. That is absolutely insane. Pair that up with her having a deployable shield and being a 3-speed, and you can quickly see why she was the best roamer and the most played roamer in the game on release. She also came out at the time that Legion came out, and Legion was also pretty strong back in the day, essentially making it to where Ela kickstarted the trap meta, making her very influential. So her being nerfed eventually to what she is now is one of the best changes for Siege's game health overall. Another great change in Rainbow Six history was one that most people actually think is a bad change, but I'm here to change your mind on that, and that was Operation Health. If you don't know what Operation Health was, it's one of the first seasons ever to come out in Rainbow Six Siege. It was a season though without any new content, and a season completely focused on fixing the game's health, whether it came to server issues, matchmaking, or bug fixes, hence the name Operation Health. The issue with Operation Health is that yes, it eventually did fix all these issues, but during the process there were more issues caused than fixed. This made the ranked season completely unplayable, but overall every bug that they ever found was fixed, making it to where overall it was a good season and made the game better. I think of all the updates in this video, this is arguably the most important, and people really don't realize how important this was, because without Operation Health, this game would be a complete buggy mess and probably would have died 3 years ago. Something that almost did make the game die out though was the TDM meta, specifically just the playstyle of playing fast, and something that didn't really help this was runout detection time. Back in the day, it would take 2 entire seconds for the enemies to spot you and you get pinged whenever you would run out of the building. But after years of this being a pretty consistent issue, and on some maps making it to where you could kill people before you were ever detected, Ubisoft decided that they needed to make a change. So later down the line, they changed the runout detection time from 2 seconds to 1 second, which is what we have now, making runouts a lot harder and riskier to do. Not to mention, back in the day, when the game first dropped, the runout detection was 5 seconds. And in the very first update to the game, they changed it to 2, and eventually to what we have now, which is 1 second. Not only did they change when they ping you when they run out, but they just changed pings in general in Operation Shadow Legacy with ping 2.0. This is definitely one of the best changes in the game, especially for new players, and I'll tell you why. Back in the day, when you would Z-ping objects, it would just pop out as a yellow ping, and there were only 2 types of pings in the game. Yellow pings that didn't identify anything, and red pings that would just show you when operators were pushing. With ping 2.0 coming out, if you would yellow ping a gadget, instead of just showing a normal yellow ping with the number of your operator on it, it would actually show you an icon of that gadget. So if you ping a Legion mine now, it shows the Legion mine icon so your teammates know what you're pinging. Back in the day, it didn't work like that. It would just be a yellow ping, which meant that without comms, you were kind of screwed and you didn't really know what that ping was. And that is why I think ping 2.0 stands to be one of the best changes in Siege history. Just like this next change, which is cross progression. If you don't know what cross progression is, essentially it makes it to where if you have an account from one console and you want to go to a different console, you can keep all of the progression you had on your previous one and cross it over, hence the name cross progression. This is really nice because I actually played on console for about 3 years. Then when I moved to PC, I didn't have any of my skins or anything, but the second they introduced cross progression, my Ubisoft accounts got linked and I got all of my console skins back and onto my PC account. It just makes it so much more seamless to switch accounts and switch consoles that it's just one of the best changes for quality of life ever in Siege history. Something that was much more of an influential change in my opinion though is the 20th best change in Siege history, which is the shield rework nerf. If you don't know, back in Year 9 Season 1 Operation Deadly Omen, they buffed ballistic shields a lot. Whether it be the shield on Fuse, Monty shield, or Blitz shield, shields just got buffed, and they got buffed so hard that shields were hard meta for a long time. In Pro League, in fact, shields were used almost every single round, and they were banned over 90% of the games played. The same goes for ranked as well. So finally, shields got nerfed very recently to what they are now, which is a more balanced state of the shields, but shields are still almost meta as well, even now, but not quite the powerhouse and monster that they were back then, which is why the shield rework needed to happen, and I still think is one of the most influential updates in the season, because if they didn't do what they did to shields, they would still be dominating every single game, and the game might have died at this point. But I think one change that completely revived the game before it could die is the final best change in Siege history that also came out in Operation Deadly Omen, and that was the return of every attacker ACOG. If you don't know, like I said earlier, they used to use the 1.5 times scope to balance operators, but before that, they would use the ACOG scope before the 1.5 times scope was introduced into the game. When they used the 2.5 ACOG scope to balance operators, it made the game a lot less fun, because most people had fun playing Buck and Ash and running in the building with an ACOG and getting an ace. Even though it wasn't completely balanced, it's what gave identity to the game for a while, so when they took those ACOGs away, the game just kind of felt stale. But in Operation Deadly Omen, when every attacker ACOG returned to the game was in a lot better of a state for it. And that was the 21 best changes in Rainbow Six Siege history. Check out this next video, and I'll see you there.